You're listening to The Sacred Sofa, a podcast that explores all things theology and therapy. My name is Grace Brown. I'm a registered psychotherapist, certified Canadian counselor, and owner of Journey with Grace Counseling Services.
And I'm Brad Watson, pastor of Nexus Church and author of the book, A Path Called Compelling. Welcome to The Sacred Sofa. Friends, welcome to another episode of The Sacred Sofa, where we're discussing this year the 7 great plot lines in life and how they might inform our narrative selves. And this week, we're going to talk about the rags to riches storyline. So Grace, welcome. Good to be with you again.
Always good to be with you too, Brad. I'm super excited about another episode. We're talking about the various storylines. And of course, this week we're talking about rags to riches storyline. So I'm very curious. So let's dive in.
Yes, let's dive in. Well, let me start this way, Grace. I've had a little difficulty lately because I've been asking some people I know what they daydream about. And I have found some people very reluctant to tell me where their head goes, which I suppose that's fair. That's our one truly private space. But in the few interactions I've had with certain people that have told me sometimes what they daydream about, occasionally some interesting things will come up. So for instance, I have one friend who says he daydreams about, it's been a tough season in basketball, but now, you're in the big game, family and friends are in the stands, and he makes perfect shot right at the buzzer. The crowd goes wild. That he sort of dreams of sports stardom, so to speak. Another person I know daydreams about maybe being the mayor and the decisions they would make for the city, if they were mayor. Other people, they daydream about conversations and whatnot. But it's curious to me because daydreaming isn't just mental static or drifting off. Apparently, now I'm no psychologist, Grace, but apparently psychologists say that daydreaming can be like a rehearsal space where we quietly practice possibilities, tell ourselves stories about who we are and who we might become. And what's interesting to me is if you pay attention, those stories can at times follow a plot line.
Mm-hmm.
We picture ourselves moving from ordinary to extraordinary, from overlooked maybe to recognized, small to significant. So in other words, occasionally at least, we daydream the rags to riches storyline. Almost all of us at some point imagine going from unnoticed to unforgettable. So Grace, I'm curious, any thoughts about daydreaming? What do you make of this whole idea? It's rehearsal space in our minds. And do you think daydreams are trying to tell us something about maybe unmet longings or a hidden sense of inadequacy? Like, what do we do with that?
Absolutely. So, yes, I would agree that daydreaming can be a rehearsal space in our minds. First, I think it's important for us to know that daydreaming can have positive and negative aspects to it, like most things. Daydreaming, when it's unconsciously automatic, compulsive, frequent, and often extensive, can be an indication of escapism.
Okay.
It's a form of dissociation. So you're disconnecting from reality to dwell in the place of fantasy, right? So that can have its dangers. Using fantasy to not face the reality of our situation, especially if the situation is disturbing or an event feels overwhelming, scary, or even traumatic, right? And so you just got to be careful that there is a danger in terms of the spectrum. But in its general form, it is a rehearsal space. Intentional daydreaming can be a helpful way to focus on hopes and dreams. For example, do you remember the movie Field of Dreams? Did you ever see that?
Of course I do.
Okay.
Yes.
Classic film,
Classic
right?
movie. Yes.
Right. The famous line, if you build it, they will come. Well, daydreaming is a way of building it to see what is to come. It helps us envision what may seem impossible. I think, and I think another benefit of daydreaming is that it can highlight something hidden. You mentioned that briefly. Something hidden that is awakening, something that's important, waiting to be fulfilled. Could be unmet needs, our longings, It
Stuff
can
like
be
that.
quite useful.
Hmm. That's fascinating. I don't know if you, I find myself lost. Sometimes it isn't, I don't even really recognize what I'm
Mm-hmm.
sort of thinking about when I'm daydreaming. But, sometimes it's very concerted. It's very, oh, it can be escape. Absolutely. And I could see how that would be a problem if you get sort of
Mm-hmm.
hung up in there too long. But that's fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we've just talked about an introduction to this rags to
Mm.
riches
Mm.
storyline. Let's go a bit deeper, Brad. Take us deeper.
Right, right. Okay. So the rags to riches plot line is simple. The protagonist, lead character, rises from obscurity, poverty, or weakness to find success, wealth, or fulfillment. So,
Hmm.
entity, you could say. And the world finally recognizes it too. So that's what's happening beneath some of our favorite stories. So now some of the most recognizable ones would be Cinderella. I know it's an old one, but she's living a life of servitude with her stepsisters, not being treated well, and a little bit of magic, and she finally becomes her full self. Or Rocky, right? Rocky's just this no-name boxer in Philly, and he gets his shot at the championship. Slumdog Millionaire is a recent sort of one. And I've actually heard from reading a few people on this, that Barbie, that movie from last year,
Mm-hmm.
it
Mm-hmm.
could be either sort of like rags to riches or kind of rebirth, which we'll get to later. But
Mm-hmm.
these stories, they're not just entertainment, they're mirrors of something, I think, deep within us that wants to be seen, known, and valued. So
Mm-hmm.
Grace, I'm curious, why do you think recognition or being seen is maybe so central to human identity? Like, what happens in us when we don't feel recognized?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. To answer that, I want to give a bit of what I call psychoeducation. Are you familiar with
Mm.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Okay. So for those who aren't
Yes,
familiar,
yes.
okay, good, good. So for those who aren't familiar, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a psychological theory by a person named Abraham Maslow. And he uses this theory to organize human needs into a five-level pyramid. And the base level of the pyramid is basic survival, and the top of the pyramid is fulfilling one's potential, or another word for it would be self actualization. So I'm going to start from the bottom to the top. Bottom rung is physiological needs. So that's air, water, food, shelter, sleep, the basics of our biology. Okay. And then moving up the pyramid, safety needs. So personal security, employment, resources, health, agency. Um, the third level, love and belonging, which include friendship,
Mm.
intimate relationships, family, a sense of connection. Then we move up to esteem, respect, self esteem, status, strength, freedom. And then at the top of the pyramid is something called self actualization, where it's our desire to become the most that we can be.
Mm.
Now, these things aren't static. So you're moving up and down the pyramid throughout a lifetime, right?
Right.
It's not like level one. It's not like a video game where we just
Mm. Mm-hmm.
leveling up, but you're not moving, you're moving up and down. But smack dab in the middle of this pyramid, on the way to self-actualization, is love and belonging.
Mm.
So we have a fundamental human need for connection. We're created for relationships, Brad.
Mm-hmm.
There was a well documented study of babies in an orphanage in which the infants had everything they needed physically. Okay. And due to understaffing, the children's physical needs were met, so diapers changed, fed. However, the lack of emotional connection and nourishing actually caused what we now know to be called failure to thrive,
Mm.
or in that context, institutional failure to thrive.
Mm.
Some babies actually died.
Huh. Wow.
Physical needs met, but the emotional needs were not met. Some of these infants were observed for over 14 years, and it was noted that they experienced so many deficits
Huh.
due to the neglect. Poor impulse control, social withdrawal, problems with coping and regulating their emotions, low self-esteem. There was even some pathological behaviors that began
Mm.
tics, tantrums, stealing, self-harm, and self-punishment. It also impacted their cognitive function. So there was poor intellectual functioning and they had low academic achievements.
Hmm.
And that you can do a bit more research. David Wolf, who was a PhD, who was a psychologist at the time, has done a lot of modern research on this topic. Um, but all the physical needs being met, emotional nurturing, absence of connection to community led to some extremely um, difficulty. Now, the positive is the more we know about these things, it improves our knowledge of how to address some of our fundamental needs. So
Mm-hmm.
it led to advances in things like kangaroo care. So
Huh.
babies who are born in hospitals immediately get skin to skin contact with a guardian or parent. Um, there's encouragement of looking into your baby or your child's eyes while you're talking to them while they're being fed. You're not just propping them up with a bottle. Like there's something important happening there with that
Mm-hmm.
eye contact. And it informs our understanding of attachment or connection and the practices that we put in place. Ultimately, what I'm saying is this: being in community allows us to be seen. It's an important part of our holistic development.
Mm.
And conversely, to not be seen, to not be accepted, has long term effects on our holistic well
Mm.
being.
Mm.
That's why it's so important.
Yeah, so it's not just it was interesting because as you were initially talking, I thought you were actually going to talk about how, oh, this fits with the top tier,
Mhm.
the self-actualization, but it seems like that the need to be recognized, seen, valued actually kind of, it's just above the core components of things that we need to stay alive. So that's really, really fascinating. And I
Mhm.
think that this storyline is what sort of showcases that best for us, obviously in dramatic fashion. And it's
Mhm.
interesting to me because Jesus,
Mhm.
his story fits rags to riches perfectly, right? I mean,
Mhm.
he's born backwater area of the Roman Empire, just in the middle of nowhere. He's born in a cave, a barn, becomes a refugee. Like he's really
Mhm.
quite literally the classic nobody under the radar. And then
Mhm.
sort of, you know, he finds himself at the age of 30, right? He suddenly arrives on the scene. Suddenly he's gone from rags to riches. And it's fascinating to me because Jesus embodies the story of rags to riches, but it's with a twist, right? Born
Mhm.
in a feeding trough, raised in an overlooked town, becomes a wandering rabbi who brings sight to the blind, raises the dead, reveals the kingdom of God. But what's
Mhm.
interesting to me is this: when he returns home, his own people dismiss him. So he comes home after he's risen to fame, and they're all like, whoa, 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 who's this guy? We know him. He's just a carpenter. We don't want anybody getting too big for their britches. So
Mhm.
even Jesus experiences like this tension between ordinary and becoming the rising star, between being known, fully known, and being rejected.
Mhm.
And I'm curious from a psychological point of view, how do we ourselves hold that tension between our deep desire to be known and the vulnerability or rejection that often comes when we step into visibility or step into ourselves and maybe find some people don't like that?
Mhm. It's funny. I'm just thinking here now, Brad. We are so complex as humans. Honestly, we really are, and paradoxical because on one hand, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, it's like there's this idea that I want to be get rich quick, like I want to be internet famous, like I'm
Mm.
doing a cover and all of a sudden I'm discovered, and our Canadian Justin Bieber, like his
Yeah.
story, like there's this desire for all of that, but then there's the judgment of like, wait a minute, you grew up in Timmins, like
Yeah,
Shania
right.
Twain, like
Yeah,
on
yeah.
top of her game, like, and Jesus had the same experience. It's like he's got all these accolades in other parts of towns, and he gets home and they're like, remember
Yeah.
you went,
Yeah.
you just can't win, Brad. You just
Yeah,
can't.
no, exactly.
But I like your use of the word tension because without intention and healthy boundaries, there can be a conflict with our natural desires to be known and an acceptance that to be in relationship requires risk.
Mm.
Right? It's unrealistic to believe that we're going to be liked by everyone and not face rejection and or even criticism.
Hmm.
And so living with intention, living out our values and having healthy boundaries around that exposure is actually going to minimize the impact of rejection.
Mm. That's good stuff. The other thing I was thinking about this plot line is how, in some ways, it could be skewed to sort of prop up maybe the American dream myth that it works for some people, it happens, but
Mm.
like in most rags to riches stories, the protagonist doesn't want to be in rags. Cinderella doesn't want to be in servitude. Rocky doesn't want to be eking out a living, right? That
Mm-hmm.
isn't chosen for them. But what's most striking to me about Jesus' story is that he chooses the path of descent, right? Like in Philippians 2, it talks about he gives up all of this stuff, right? He chooses the way of humility and service, the way of the cross.
Mm-hmm.
So the rags to riches story for Jesus kind of flipped on its head. It's not about climbing higher, but about choosing to go lower. It's about trusting the downward way of resurrection, you could say. The way up is down. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
just wondering how our culture's maybe obsession with achievement and self promotion, I wonder if that makes it difficult for us to believe that transformation can come through descent, surrender, maybe even loss.
Mm-hmm. I love this. Jesus' entire mission was countercultural
Mm,
and counter spiritual,
mm,
for the beliefs of that day. And it's the same mission for those of us who walk in faith, including those of us who walk the Jesus path.
mm,
Our culture and our society, and even some of our spiritual communities,
mm,
absolutely are promoting this message of striving for accolades and self promotion. And there's so many voices that amplify this idea that we can often miss that quieter, still voice of transformation through the descent, through
mm,
surrender or loss. And that those quieter voices are often drowned out.
mm,
Um, Heard enough times, the message of society we then internalize and then begin to believe that we can take a detour around the hard road and get a swift VIP pass,
yeah.
to greatness. But the reality is, most of the greats in history who become famous
Mm,
is for their struggle, and
mhm,
some even their death,
mm,
not through taking the easy road.
mm, mhm.
Jesus, we've already talked about Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, Mother Teresa, Mandela,
Yeah.
right? Like throughout history, those who become famous, it's through the struggle, through the
Mm.
struggle.
Yeah, and the sort of even the name rags to riches can be misleading because while the storylines that we see in Hollywood can often sort of contain a wealth element to it, I think
Mm,
the true rags to riches journey, it's not about possessions or wealth at all. It's about discovering who we are,
mm,
stepping into our identity, why we matter, where we belong. So the riches part of the story is actually internal, our
mm, mm,
convictions, not coins, you could say, a
mm,
sort of deep knowing of who we are beneath the disguises. And so I feel like every rags to riches story whispers this same truth. The real fortune is the discovery of a self-worth living.
mm,
And I'm wondering, in your work with clients, Grace, how do you see people wrestling with this search for identity, trying to uncover, right, truly, who am I beneath all the roles that I play, the
mm,
expectations, the disguises I put on in front of certain people? Like, yeah,
mm,
how do you go about that?
mm. I see it in so many ways. This can be evidenced by increasing anxiety, low mood, depression, low self esteem,
Mm,
extreme feelings of stress and overwhelm. I am seeing a lot more cases of something called social anxiety.
interesting.
Some of the challenges that brings on social anxiety is people's perception of who they feel they're supposed to be, how
Mm-hmm.
they're supposed to look, how they're supposed to act.
Mm,
Again, this is the social messaging of unrealistic expectations.
mm,
And something that we call maladaptive is this strategy to present oneself as who you are not, and it's called masking. You've
mm,
probably heard of that.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Examples would be introverts trying to present as extroverts, neurodivergent folks trying to fit into a neurotypical standard,
Mm.
couples trying to live out their parents' marriage,
Right.
in a world that looks nothing like what their parents' world was like, culturally, financial, on and on and on it goes.
Right.
And so when I'm journeying with clients, I use a lot of motivational interviewing to help them self-reflect, to
Mm.
help them explore what are their beliefs,
Mm.
what are the messages and the myths, and then help them discover or then rediscover their sense of self and allow that to be congruent, not with
Mm.
what external validation or people are saying, but what's internal to them.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. And what happens when we consider this plot line, as I considered in light of Jesus' story, is I'm
Mm,
reminded uh, that the overlooked places, the small places, the ignored places of our lives that maybe is where it hurts most for us, right? Or adds to
mm,
that social anxiety. These are not wasted places. And I think that's what the storyline really reminds us of. They're
mm,
the settings where, God delights to plant seeds of transformation, and feeling obscure or stuck. It often can feel like we're in exile, right? Or,
mm,
but on the Jesus path, I think those are the classrooms of character, and what
mm,
looks like insignificance may actually be the birthplace of coming fulfillment.
mm,
So
mm.
how do we, I wonder if there's a way to help people reframe our experiences of obscurity or waiting, the times when life maybe feels stalled for us, so that people can begin to see them as formative rather than just meaningless, and nothing's
Mm.
happening in life right now. Is there a way to do that?
Honestly, yes, there is a way to do that, but I'll be honest and validate that is a struggle. It's a
Mm-hmm.
struggle. Most people don't run towards the things that make them feel uncomfortable, much less painful, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, we humans, we're impatient folks. We
Yeah,
are
yeah.
impatient. You've talked in a previous episode about the culture of speed,
Mm.
right? That's true and absolutely relevant throughout history and even more so today. I'm
Mm.
gonna share a funny story with you. At least funny to me. So I hope you find it funny too. So uh quite some time ago, I accidentally bought large flake oats instead of our
Okay.
usual quick oats. I don't know if you knew there was a difference,
I
right?
didn't know.
There's actually steel oats, which is like high fiber protein oats. And then in the middle is large flake oats. And then there's quick
Oh,
oats.
oh, okay.
Okay. So we usually buy quick oats. I made a mistake, large flake oats. So instead of 1 to 5 minutes, it takes like 20 minutes.
Ooh.
And I bought
Ooh.
2 bags. Now, my husband, Billy Joe, and I, we can laugh about it now, but trust me, that was not a good breakfast morning. It's like what we thought would take 5 minutes, like cooking down. My husband still calls it million-minute oats.
Million.
Tends to go towards hyperbole.
Mm.
What am I saying? We're being influenced by so many messages to hurry up, build faster, grow faster, bigger. Recently, Ontario's 401 highway widened to 4 lanes each side and increased the speed limit.
Yes.
Where are we going so fast?
Mm.
Where? Everything in a rush, everything in a rush.
Mm.
It takes intention to slow down, reflect, wait, breathe.
Mm.
And it takes practice and wisdom to recognize and accept that it's in the waiting where we are being formed and transformed.
Mm.
I really liked what you said in your sermon on Sunday, and I'm hoping you share a bit of it here for us, for those who didn't get a chance to listen. I think this is really powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you really, okay, what's the meaning of this plot line? At least for me, and how do you apply it? At least for
Mm,
me, it's this: don't hate or despise your humble beginnings or
mhm,
the long middle chapters of life. So For instance, I went to 3 different schools on the same street. I just basically went from elementary, high school to college on the same street. I was always very embarrassed of that, right? You know, some people, they're going off to school in BC or the States or whatever, traveling the world. So, you know, for me, it was always kind of like, wow, I didn't really expand my horizon much. But one of the things that's really poignant to me about the Rags to Riches storyline is humble beginnings can really become the birthplace of something great. You never see a Rags to Riches story where somebody starts off doing well. That's just not the story. It's always the humble beginnings. And so often I see people who I think are ashamed of their story, whether it's a faith story, a church story, ashamed of their parents, you know, where they grew up, their socioeconomic class when they grew up. Like, it's easy to become ashamed of our humble beginnings. But I think what the Rags to Riches storyline does is prompt us to go, whoa, 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 whoa. That's just the great setting for a good story. There's no need to be ashamed of our humble beginnings. And then our middle chapters. Now, have you seen any of the Rockies?
Yes, all of them.
Okay, so have I. So one of the interesting things to me is basically, and they all follow the same formula, but essentially the movie starts with Rocky's got an opportunity at a fight. And then at the end, either he goes the distance. So sometimes he doesn't always win, but that's important. He goes the distance or he wins or whatever. But the storyline in the middle is basically him just working out for an hour and a half between the beginning and, you know, the end, the climatic fight, whatever it is. But I think that that's actually really telling, because that's where formation happens. Is, yes, we have humble beginnings, but the middle chapters, it's all about just building character, building resilience, building strength. And those can be, you know, I just turned 45, Grace. Like, in the middle age years, it can feel long, right? Like, where's the plot line here? And I think this storyline just really helps us go, hey, even though your days may not feel like they're adding up to much, the long middle chapter is you're putting in your time, just like Rocky, doing the work. And, you know, that's the way some storylines go. So don't, I would say this to listeners, you know, just don't be ashamed of humble beginnings, and don't despise the long middle chapters, because they're forming us. So, yeah.
That is so fantastic, Brad. And I think everyone could understand the trajectory of a good story, but we forget. When we're living it, we start to forget. And so this is such a powerful reminder. I think there's one more key point I'd like to mention here. Part of the formation is how we respond in the waiting to the need to wait. Okay? Now, I've traveled a fair bit, and you recently exotically traveled in France, I believe, right? And I so can't wait to hear more about your stories of travel. There's always poignant things I know you can bring out of that. But part of travel will absolutely involve waiting. And whether we like it or not, it's happening. So what's important is how I wait. How I wait is just as important as having to wait. Because here's the thing, I can be aggressive with staff, I can be snarky with other passengers, I can demand a refund, right? Or I can listen to music, read a book, catch up on episodes of The Sacred Sofa, right? I'm in control of my response to the waiting. Middle chapters are happening. So what am I going to do? What am I going to do?
Yeah, that's great, Grace, because, like, of course, movies are 2 to 3 hours, right? So obviously the middle chapters get short, and it's hard when, you know, the plot line of our lives is years, not hours, right? That we're living it. But I love that you brought up travel, right? Because, I mean, just airports alone, I don't know about you, but there's moments of like, oh my goodness, security line coming up, got to get my belt off, my shoes, you know, kind of like action, and then wait, you know. And I think that, you know, that's exactly what we need to hear. It's not just you're gonna have to wait, it's how we wait. So but you know, in the end, the Rags to Riches storyline, I think, reminds all of us we're not finished yet, right? What looks like rags, what looks like weakness or hiddenness or smallness, or even the embarrassing things, they might be the soil where God is forming something beautiful. And nothing is wasted in God's economy on the Jesus path For Jesus, it's carpenter bench, humble beginnings to cross to resurrection. I think that pattern remains. Your story isn't stuck. It's still unfolding. So final question, Grace. If someone listening today feels stuck in the rags part of their story, is there a small act of faith or self-compassion, something they could do that help them at least trust that transformation is still possible?
Yes, absolutely. Herein lies the power of community. So there used to be this mentorship strategy, and unfortunately, I don't hear about it much anymore. So maybe it's still a thing. But this mentorship strategy was to be intentional about creating a triad. So what would happen is you would choose a mentor, so someone who was older, either in age or experience, and also a mentee, so someone who was younger that you could mentor. And so you're looking forward and you're bringing along someone behind. And the idea was to be intentional about learning and growing. I believe that's a powerful tool for growth. So one small step is to allow yourself to be vulnerable with someone. Now, I'm not saying it may be easy, but it's necessary. Often there are universal human themes in our shared stories. And so tragedy turns to triumph. And in allowing this person to enter your life, they can be there to encourage you, to remind you that the sun will shine again, and that you're not alone in the rags part of your story. That mutual sharing and vulnerability is also inspirational and encouraging. You mentioned earlier on self-compassion. That also is an incredible, powerful tool. Starting to tell yourself what you would tell someone else who is going through a similar situation.
That's, you know what? Thank you for that very tangible, practical advice. Because I think that's, look to others. In the power of community, at least I know in church community, is that you have that sort of baked in. You're going to have people of different ages. So there's opportunities to encourage people coming before you, maybe a little bit earlier on the path. Also people who have probably weathered more storms than we have and can help give us perspective. So Grace, thank you it was fun exploring with you this plot line, and for all of the ways that you sort of bring some of these ideas and add just such a neat component, a way of thinking about it. And at the end there, really practical advice as well. So thank you, Grace. And thank you to our listeners. And we're going to pick it up next week with the quest plot line. So
this is middle chapters now.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Always a pleasure, Brad. Thank you so much to our listeners, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.